Nope.
I know monsters exist. Trust me, as crazy as it sounds, it's 100% accurate. I had a hard time convincing myself at first. You try and substantiate the things you've seen, telling yourself it's just an undiscovered species or something. That was my go-to explanation when I killed the first one. Me and a couple of my buddies had planned a hunting trip down to Rapid City, South Dakota. Best place to go for year-round game. Since around the age of 8, I'd been making this place my very own sandbox. I knew everything about it. The lakes, trails, and those beautiful mountains. When we arrived, we set up camp, readied our equipment, and set out to plant a few traps for breakfast the next day. It was here I knew something wasn't right. As my friend was tying down a twig into one of the snags, we all heard a sharp screech rip through the idyllic woods. It caused my friend to slip, and the snag ended up closing on his finger. While we were treating the wound at camp, the same screech ripped through again. Shrugging it off as an aggressive owl call, we headed off to sleep, all feeling uneasy about the crappy start to our trip. I proceeded to have one of the worst night's sleep of my life. That is, if you could even call it sleep. I tossed and turned, kicking around in my tiny tent, until I heard a crack outside that made me freeze. The fire was burning out, and it was casting the long shadows of the trees onto the side of my tent. I listened as intensely as I could, and watched in mounting fear as the shadows started to change. Another dark shape was weaving in and out of the uniform line of trees, popping up behind one and each time reappearing bigger, which meant it was getting closer. Now, as an experienced hunter, I knew there was only one plausible explanation for this: a bear. Bears don't give a crap if you've got a fire going. If they smell food, they're coming to have a look. I reached around my tent for my backpack and searched through it as quietly as I could. The shadow was now blocking out all of the trees. It was right outside. Quietly, I pulled out my hunting blade and tried to think of a plan. It would have been useless to try and take the bear full on. This isn't the Revenant. A bear will rip you in half without even blinking. I'd have to try and run for the car. The rifles were all in the back. There was a noise from my other side, and I realized one of my friends must have opened their tent. I saw the shadow flicker in my peripheral vision, and when I turned to look, it was gone. Then, I heard the scream. I was out of my tent within a few seconds, haphazardly looking around and holding out the knife. In front of me was an image that will be burned into my mind until the day I die. My friend, the one with the bandaged up finger, being held in the hands of an abhorrent creation of God. It was at least 9 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, hairless, with a curved spine and long, saggy ears. Its face was sunken and littered with cuts and scars. The wounds were festering and rotting. Its mouth was blistered, and blood poured out of the gums, which were on full show, further enhancing its yellow, jagged teeth. The monster was holding my friend between both of its hands, claw-like and piercing into his abdomen. I screamed at it, and it snapped its head around to look me dead on. The eyes were black and lifeless. Without blinking, the monster ripped my friend into two. As the blood and flesh scattered around the place, I saw my other friend's tent start to open. The creature must have seen me looking, because it turned, and within a second, it was ripping at the tent's opening. I took a chance. As it was reaching into the opening to rip another one of my friends into shreds, I pelted it over and over, stabbing it in the back. It reared back and screeched, as we had heard before, reaching over its shoulder to pull the blade out. I pushed it backwards, and it fell onto the embers of our fire, and began to roll around, screeching more and more as the hot ashes burned its skin. My friend had stumbled out next to me, and after seeing the top half of our buddy slumped at the base of a tree, we began to beat this thing into a bloody pulp. We did not stop until the sound of bones breaking turned into the sound of muscles mushing. Our hands, chest, and faces were dark red with its blood.
"What kind of animal was that?" my friend mumbled after a while.
That was the first one. We reported the incident to the police. They assumed we must have been mistaken with our explanation. They actually assured us it was probably a bear or a cougar, and our imagination filled in the gaps. My friend was quick to eat that up. To this day, he never talked about it with me. But to be honest, I haven't spent much time with him. I have been obsessed with finding out whatever the hell that thing was. I'm happy to say I've made a decent amount of progress. I returned to Rapid City about a month later. I'd been online and posted about my experience on some forums. I don't know, I thought there must be someone out there who knew something. And I was right. Another outdoor enthusiast named Kevin responded and told me how he'd come across something similar quite a few times. We arranged a meetup. Kevin told me how he'd grown up around the place, gone hunting with his father since he was a kid. He said the locals knew there was something dangerous up in the mountains, but they'd never been bothered by it until a few years ago. He called this creature the Wendigo. Let me just say though, it doesn't matter what folktale or name you give something. If it's a monster, it probably existed long before humankind, and has no concept of stories. That's another thing I think us humans do to try and substantiate things we can't explain. We give it a legend. Kevin told me how certain parts of the mountains were off limit due to the unexplained disappearances. He offered to take me to a place he knew the Wendigo liked to congregate. On the way, he filled me in on some of the details. Wendigos were fast, extremely strong, had fantastic hearing, and hated fire. As he said that, he tapped his backpack and winked.
"If we see any of those shits, they'll be going up in flames."
That night, we reached the base of Black Elk Peak, and Kevin took me around through a hidden path to an opening carved right into the floor. It was about 50 feet wide and pitch black. I have no idea how far down it went.
"That's where they're coming from. We found this about 6 months ago. Wasn't here before that. There's numerous other ones around the way, but we've had a lot of activity here," Kevin said, peeking down into the hole. We secluded ourselves between some trees and faced the hole, crouched in the dirt. "Now, if we see anything, you need to stay quiet. Take your photo, and we can leave, okay?"
Kevin whispered. I'd told him I needed a photo of the Wendigo so I could prove to the police they existed. "Sure, Kevin," I whispered back, while squeezing hard onto the Glock hidden under my arm. We waited and waited. The sun had gone down, and the cold had really picked up. Kevin was talking about giving up when we both heard the sound of the earth being moved. Squinting, I saw the top of a head protrude out of the hole, warily raising itself up. Kevin had not let me down. There, pulling itself out of the hole with those huge claws and drooping skin, was the Wendigo. This one was smaller than the one I killed, but it made up for it by being twice as ugly. It cracked its neck upward and started to sniff at the air. Its tongue flipped in and out of its mouth like a snake. Then it arched its back and let out that terrible screech. I felt the ground shake slightly, and Kevin grabbed hold of my arm. I hadn't even realized, but I'd pulled out the gun. "Don't you fucking dare," Kevin whispered at me. "Better get those Molotovs ready," I said, and turned to look at the opening. In the short time it had taken for Kevin to admonish me, there were now 5 Wendigos standing on the edge of the hole, staring directly at Kevin and me. They were all different heights, and all had trouble standing straight, leaning into their claws, with a focused and hungry leer painted across each rotting face. I shot first. By the time the first Wendigo's brain hit the ground, the other 4 were already galloping at us, tearing up the ground and emitting those deafening screeches. I turned up to help Kevin, but he was already lighting the rag of a petrol bottle. He threw it, and it shattered into flames in front of the beasts. They scattered around the flames, still gunning for us. I shot another in the shoulder, and it crashed into the ground, writhing about. Another stopped to help it, so I took a shot, but missed. It flinched as the bullet whizzed past, and slowly turned to face me. Its lips were curled, and its teeth were bared. I took another shot, but its fallen comrade lunged upwards and caught the bullet in the back. It fell into the flailing arms of the one who had tried to help it, and they both crumpled to the ground. The other 2 had reached Kevin, who smashed another Molotov at his feet. A surge of flames erupted in front of him, like a wall, and engulfed one of the Wendigos entirely. The other jumped away like a kangaroo, but went crashing into a rock, stumbling and finally falling to the floor, breathing rapidly. I shot at the one that was on fire to stop it from running around screaming. It also hit the ground, charred and whimpering. Within 10 seconds, this lovely little slice of nature had turned into what looked like a war zone. Kevin was on the floor, panting, and I was leaning against a tree, trying to catch my breath. We both caught each other's eyes and started nervously laughing. That's when I learned one of my most important life lessons. Never take your eye off the ball. It felt like a hot whip had been slapped across my face. The Wendigo who had stopped to assist the one I shot had snuck up and slashed me right across the face. I felt the chunks of skin rip off my cheekbones, and I fell onto the ground, unable to see, and with only a faint buzzing to hear. That's when I blacked out. Of course, I survived. It's kind of a spoiler, considering you're reading about it right now, but yeah. It didn't get to kill me that day. Thankfully, Kevin was able to scare it off before it sunk its teeth into me. He told me afterwards that he only had one Molotov cocktail left, so I should feel grateful he wasted it on me. Since then, him and I have become pretty good friends. One good thing to come out of all of this in any case. Of course, I told the police what happened, but they're not interested. It's bad for business, I suppose. Nobody wants to go hunting where they could become the prey. Just be careful if you ever go down to Rapid City. There's something there that's not afraid to tango. And remember, fire is your friend. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, you know what to do. Take that like button, stab it in the back several times, throw it into a fire, and then beat it into a bloody pulp. Shout out to the author of the story, Reddit user Jam102. I will leave a link down below where you can check out more of their stories. Man, this story was pretty badass, I gotta say. Hopefully, you will be seeing more from this author. But until then, everybody, remember to stay safe out there. I'll be seeing you in the next video.